Member for North Coast.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm very honored to rise today to speak to the throne speech. I'd like to start by recognizing my legislative assistant, Robert Hill, for his commitment to northern and rural issues and to ensuring that I get on the right plane at the right time. Thank you, Rob, and thank you to my constituency assistants, Kayleen Foote and Carrie Thorpe, back in Prince Rupert, who are assisting record numbers of people with housing and affordability issues, who are desperately trying to find resources to refer struggling families to. I'd also like to acknowledge my former constituency assistants, Alexi Stevens, or Lexi as she is known, and wish her all the best in her new endeavors, traveling the world and experiencing the joy of being a new auntie. Honourable Speaker, there is too much influence of big money in politics and not enough commitment to middle class and working families reflected in this throne speech. The throne speech is about the vision of the current government, and yet the throne speech does not reflect the priorities of British Columbians, let alone my constituents in North Coast. Such as, how is this government going to make life more affordable for everyday people? And when will this government take action to help our most vulnerable assets, our children? The Representative for Children and Youth just released a report called Broken Promises. This title speaks to the BC Liberal record of governing for this province. This government has given a $1 billion tax break over the last 4 years to the top 2% in this province, and yet report after report demonstrates we are failing in child welfare, and BC's child poverty rate is higher than the national average. There are still over 163,000 children living in poverty in British Columbia. At the current rate, it would take until the year 2053 to eliminate child poverty in BC. We are still the only province in Canada without a poverty reduction plan. Children are dying in government care, like Alex Gervais, the latest victim of a failed priority by this government. While there is money to give away to those that need it the least, those like Alex suffered the consequences. Not one word in this throne speech mentioned childcare, and yet we have one of the worst situations when it comes to childcare costs and availability. There is scant reference to the key issues that are important to First Nations, and in this throne speech, when it's in a very important time in history in regard to Aboriginal people's rights. We have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We're no longer talking about recommendations here. We're talking about calls to action. And the courts are telling us to do so in cases like Delmaguk and Sikulteen. There's no mention of that. It took 4 years and the revelations that political staff in the Ministry of Transportation's office were purposely deleting emails about missing and murdered Indigenous women to get this government to bring safe transportation for families who live along Highway 16, otherwise known as the Highway of Tears. The throne speech does not touch on the staggering number of Aboriginal kids in care at 60%, and even though they represent less than 10% of BC's population. The recent children's report valuing early intervention and Indigenous youth Indigenous youth as well as kinship care and cultural connections were absent from the throne speech. The throne speech says, and I quote, "And in the coming weeks, your government will implement a new rural economic development strategy. It begins with an unwavering commitment to get to yes on building projects that create jobs in rural communities, projects like cites and LNG. Secondly, investments to create jobs through necessary infrastructure improvements." Well, Honourable Speaker, I eagerly await this announcement. Just ask the City of Prince Rupert how it's managing its infrastructure needs. Lead in the drinking water, a failing dam, no sewage treatment, crumbling roads, and yet not one LNG agreement made with the municipality to support the supposed influx of workers from the coming LNG bonanza promised 4 years ago by the Premier. Nothing for Prince Rupert to prepare for industry, and yet the burden falls to the city to support this industry. In this throne speech, the government boasts about their jobs numbers, and there's certainly some evidence to say, while British Columbia is leading the way in job growth, we know that it's actually not accurate when you think about the kinds of jobs that are being created. In fact, BC actually led Canada in growth of below average wage work over the last number of years. When you have low-wage, part-time workers who can't pay their bills, whose MSP is going up, whose ICBC is going up, then they're falling farther behind. While the numbers may look good on paper, the economic reality in the homes and lives of real people is not as pretty. The government boasts about low taxes, but what's really interesting is that over these last 16 years, under this current government, there have been significant tax cuts to personal income taxes, but they've been replaced with regressive taxes, like MSP premiums and ICBC premiums. When you add up all the taxes that people pay, all of it, income tax, PST, MSP, fuel, property tax, the people paying the bulk of the taxes in this province are the bottom of our income earners. That's an unfair burden to our lower earners in our province. Who's benefiting from all this? Well, it's the wealthy. The top earners actually are paying less tax, a lower effective tax rate than everybody else. So we have an unfair system where the tax burden is placed on the bottom earners. When you call it a fee, it's a tax. It's a regressive tax. So whether you make $400,000 a year or $40,000 a year, you're still paying the same fee. This is simply not fair. The BC Liberals only include income taxes in their numbers while ignoring MSP, hydro, and ICBC, and more hidden taxes that everyone has to pay. When you add those costs, BC isn't the lowest in taxes. We have one of the highest costs of living. These increases cost the average family at least $1,000 per year. That's $1,000 more, Honourable Speaker. A year ago, the Seniors Advocate said 82% of care homes in British Columbia weren't meeting the government's own standards of 3.36 hours of direct care per day. The government said, we quote, "We need to do better." But things have gotten worse, not better. Now it's 91% of care homes that aren't meeting that standard. In my own community, seniors are being woken up very early in the morning and often have to sit 2-3 hours before they're able to eat breakfast. They're not being toileted in time, and they're suffering the incredible indignity of having to sit in soiled diapers. In the Acropolis Manor in Prince Rupert, when it comes to bathing, something we all take for granted, it's the first thing to go. Sometimes residents don't get the one bath they're allowed a week. Often the care aides are too busy, they're overworked, they're short-staffed, and they don't get to the bath. So it could go 2 or 3 weeks or more before someone gets a bath in Acropolis Manor. There's not one single mention of improving this kind of care for seniors in the throne speech, let alone improving the situation for workers that are being run ragged and burning out. The throne speech stated, "Your government will work with BC Ferries to provide a new seasonal ferry service between Port Hardy and Bella Coola." Well, the Premier announced this in September to be implemented in 2018 after scrapping it 2 years ago. Ferries are only mentioned in the context of tourism. The BC Liberals ignore completely all those who live in coastal communities who rely on ferries for work and the needed connection to services and their families. Just ask the people of Sandspit on Haida Gwaii how their economy is going, or how easy it is to get their kids to school with the cuts this government has made to their ferry service. Let's talk about the Prosperity Fund. The government says world markets may go up and down, but bringing home the generational opportunity of LNG remains within reach because of the work that has been done in our province. And your government has made a down payment for all of us. The British Columbia Prosperity Fund already has $500 million, a savings plan for the future and to pay down our debt. Honourable Speaker, let's talk about broken promises with the Prosperity Fund. Broken promises include that it will contribute to making BC debt-free. In fact, under this government, British Columbians' public debt has increased 45%, from $45.2 billion in 2011 to $65.3 billion today, the largest increase under any one premier in BC's history. That $100 billion from LNG will flow directly into the Prosperity Fund, another promise. In fact, the premier has taken $400 million from MSP hikes and and the overheated real estate market to create a pre-election slush fund. Another broken promise, that the Prosperity Fund could help eliminate the sales tax. In fact, the government took $6.5 billion from PST this year. The Prosperity Fund will accelerate the paydown of BC Hydro and for the Port Mann Bridge. In fact, BC Hydro's debt has grown from $11.7 billion to $19.5 billion under this government. The BC government has significantly scaled back their LNG expectations in this throne speech. The Premier promised British Columbians 100,000 jobs, an LNG plant up and running by 2015, and 5 by 2020. The Premier promised a $100 billion prosperity fund and a debt-free BC. None of those promises have been kept. In the 2013 throne speech, LNG was to eliminate our debt, eliminate the PST, and create 100,000 jobs and $1 trillion in economic activity. In 2014, the throne speech said LNG was a chance, not a windfall. In 2015, the throne speech said LNG was still a generational opportunity, but barely mentioned otherwise in an effort to change the channel. In 2016, in the throne speech, the BC Liberals finally admitted their timelines could not be met and whined that the government has done all that they can, but global conditions are posing new challenges. Although LNG success is not for quitters, was the change of the channel there. And this year, LNG needs, quote, global markets to thrive, and unforeseen headwinds have created challenging conditions. And reminding us that world markets may go up and down, and that the very best they can do is insist that bringing home that generational opportunity of LNG remains within reach. Quite a change in tune since the 2013 throne speech, grandiose promises. I'd like to wrap up, Honourable Speaker, talking about education. The throne speech states, average per pupil funding is now over $8,900, the highest ever, even with an increase of 10,000 students in the past 2 years. Well, BC's per pupil funding is $1,000 lower than the national average. Since the time this Premier was Education Minister in 2002, BC has gone from the second best funded education system in Canada to the second worst. And again, I quote from the throne speech. This government has worked with the Teachers Federation to achieve the longest negotiated settlement in history, ensuring 6 years of labor peace in our classrooms so that our children can learn without interruption. Like this was some sort of fun picnic that the government had with the teachers and the government. Not only did this Premier deliberately provoke a strike with BC teachers in 2012, she oversaw the longest school strike in BC's history in 2014. When the Premier was Education Minister in 2002, she illegally ripped up teachers' contracts, taking away their right to bargain for class size and composition. For 15 years, her government spent millions to battle BC teachers in court. In the end, it took the Supreme Court of Canada less than 20 minutes to decide the Premier had it wrong all along. But now a generation of BC kids spent their time in our public education system in overcrowded and under-supported classrooms because of this Premier's decisions. And Honourable Speaker, I'll return to the theme of broken promises. Throne speech says, to keep our students safe, your government has committed $1.7 billion in new infrastructure over the next 3 years and invested $1.3 billion in more than 160 completed school seismic projects, with more to come over the next 3 years. Well, in 2005, the BC Liberal government promised all schools would be seismically upgraded by 2020. In 2015, they pushed that deadline back to 2025 and 2030 for schools in Vancouver. Before the last election, this government promised 45 high-risk schools would be seismically upgraded by 2016. The Premier is now using excuses like low enrollment to delay these necessary upgrades. As of January 2017, 118 schools haven't even started to receive seismic upgrades that they muchly need. And that includes the Prince Rupert Middle School, where students are waiting to be assessed, lacking support from specialist teachers, complex classroom compositions, and they're experiencing overcrowding. Safety concerns in labs and shop classes and foods especially. Secondary students can't get all of the classes they need to graduate unless they complete online learning, and parents are outraged. But let me return to the seismic upgrades. At Prince Rupert Middle School, parents, students, and teachers, they need to see follow-through. Prince Rupert has 3 empty school buildings due to school closures to reach that so-called 95% capacity that's required. And the only middle school, PRMS, desperately needs replacement. Still, families are waiting. The building needs $8 million in seismic upgrades and $9 million just to upgrade the delayed building repairs. A new building would cost $22 million, and I'm hearing parents' concerns weekly. It's dire. The building is sinking in the rear because it's on a toxic dump site. The asbestos is still in the walls. Fumes from the sludge below are seeping into the classrooms. And they used to dump the toxic sludge out, but after 1995, all the fish in the nearby stream died, and so now it still festers underneath the students' classrooms. Now, WorkSafe did test the substance and deemed it safe to stay below the classrooms, but parents and teachers are questioning these fumes. They bubble up intermittently, and rooms need to be vacated. This is happening right now in Prince Rupert. They are working with an air quality specialist because parents don't believe they tested the gases adequately. Staff and students are experiencing reactions such as lung and asthma issues. Honourable Speaker, the school desperately needs replacement. Honourable Speaker, the throne speech is quite vacuous, and I believe failing everyday British Columbians, especially and most notably our children. Thank you.